What's up, boys and girls, ladies and gentlemen, and children of all ages? It is the OGGM. It's 9 o'clock in the morning. It's the first day of June 2022. It's 63 degrees and sunny here at Site B. It's Pride Month, Pride Week, Pride Day, whatever you want to call it. So yeah, it's been a while since we've done a what's selling list. So we're going to take a look at what's selling product-wise and talk about a video Professor Dungeon Master just did. So this is a both list of current top sellers in the tabletop role-playing game and a response to the Professor Dungeon Master video that he just did. And I'm going to be as nice as I can. All right, so Professor Dungeon Master just did a video in response to a question about the popularity of 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons and if 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons can continue that popularity. And the general conclusion is, well, it's always probably going to be number one. It may experience another downswing like it did during GURPS and during Pathfinder, but just for brand recognition and shelf space, I don't know what would have to happen to knock it off that number one. It could lose its major market share. That's a definite possibility, but it'll probably always be number one in the U.S. Remember, we're just talking about the United States, not the rest of the world. So, for those people who are like, Dungeons & Dragons is the number one role-playing game in the entire world, it's like, no, it's number one in the United States, okay? So will it remain as popular as it is right now? Well, that popularity is already diminished from where it was a year ago. And that's because we're outside again. A lot of that 5e popularity had to do with two major things. Number one, Stranger Things Critical Role put D&D into the public awareness again. And then we were trapped inside for 2 years with nothing to do but play games online or with small groups of friends and watch videos about D&D, and everybody's talking about D&D. So it was just a retroactive spiral. D&D. I'm playing D&D. The news is talking about D&D. I should play D&D. I am playing D&D. The news is talking about D&D. I should play D&D. I am playing D&D. The news, but now that number, those numbers are going down, and I would see those numbers going down even more because, there's a lot of things to consider. Number one, the 5e player base is starting to lose interest in what 5e is doing. And they're like, is there something else? And a lot of 5e players are like, you know what? I don't like the direction Wizards of the Coast is taking D&D right now. So maybe I'll explore. And number two, there is a big anniversary coming up in a little over a year. And we know Wizards of the Coast is going to change things up. So anything we think about D&D right now, we have to sort of go, well, but we don't know what Wizards are going to do in 2024. So whatever we think D&D is now, we can assume it's going to change. And of course, the third factor, Critical Role. What are they going to do? A lot of people believe it's just a matter of time before they make an official Critical Role role-playing game. It makes no sense not to make a Critical Role role-playing game of their own. And if they do, a huge chunk of the popularity will follow. So while D&D will probably always remain in top space, Free League and Modifius would have to both focus all their attention on one game to even rock Wizards of the Coast out of the top space. They could do it. They could at least get to number two and, lower the percentages much the same way Pathfinder did and GURPS did. But to blow D&D out of the water, I don't know what that would take. Maybe if Critical Role did a game. And to prove that, let's look at the current best-selling titles in the role-playing game market according to Drive-Thru. So the number one best-selling title as of this week is not a D&D product. It is a Warhammer Fantasy product called Winds of Magic. The number two top-selling title is not a D&D product. It is the One Ring from Free League starter set. Number three, the Midnight Well, this is technically a 5e product, though it's not a D&D product. It's the new update of the OGL Midnight setting. And this one is 5e rules, though it's not a D&D adventure, but it's number 3. So that technically sort of counts, but not really. Number 4 is Iron Sworn Starforged, a science fiction game. Number 5 is Ships of the Frontier for 2300 AD. I don't even know what that is. There's a game called 2300 AD. Ships of the Frontier. This is Mongoose, so it's a Traveler product. Number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now, and at number 6, we have the Tomb of Adventure Design, which can be used for any type of adventure game, though I guess technically is sort of a D&D, but not really product. So, yeah, borderline. Then we've got the next one is Shadowrun. Then we have Swords and Caverns, Delta Green, the Halls of Arden Vale, which is a OSR mega dungeon, Traveler, the Apollo 47 technical manual. We got to talk about that one. If you haven't heard about the Apollo 47 technical manual role-playing game, it is a one-page role-playing game with 1,000 pages of stuff. So the actual rules for the game is one page. Everything else is just 1,001 pages of information on the Apollo program, on the made-up Apollo. That is just brilliant, and it's the author is making fun of the incredibly big, incredibly expensive role-playing games by releasing a one-page role-playing game with 1,000 pages of technical fluff. Worlds Without Number is also there, and that seems to be pretty much the top 10. So you'll notice that there is no Wizards of the Coast direct products in that top 10. There are some Wizards of the Coast adjacent products. Midnight by Edge Studios is a 5e compatible, but it's not from Wizards of the Coast. And Tomb of Adventure Design could be, it's for any fan adventures type thing, but it is also, I would say, I'd give it the 5e adjacent. That's it. The next closest one would be the Halls of Arden Vale, but that's an OSR. But that's D&D adjacent, so yeah. And Worlds Without Numbers, again, is an OSR. But the OSR is D&D adjacent. So there are some D&D adjacent products on the top 10, but there's nothing from Wizards of the Coast. In fact, when we look at the numbers consistently, games that have been nominated for Ennies so far, not a single product from Wizards of the Coast. Games that were nominated for Hugo Awards and Nebula Awards, not a single product from Wizards of the Coast. Sales and games being played on Roll20, D&D number 1, but barely, and number 2 is just so close. And sales-wise, yes, D&D still holds the majority of the sales, but, if we're looking at the bestsellers for this week, not a single Wizards of the Coast product. So I think that shows that the popularity is starting to dwindle, but it will always be number 1. And it's interesting to see what people are interested in. Yes, obviously fantasy is still number 1, with sci-fi being a close number 2. Call of Cthulhu on there, of course. So we got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 in the top. And 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So of the top 12, 6 are fantasy, 6 are sci-fi. So I would say popularity-wise, sci-fi is currently at number 2, fantasy still at number 1. It'd be interesting to see genre-wise if there's a genre that could kick fantasy out of the top 10. I think it's more likely sci-fi genre-wise could succeed over fantasy. But as for sales, it would be tough for anything to beat D&D unless it is when Critical Role does an official Critical Role role-playing game, that could knock Wizards of the Coast D&D off the top, at least for a while. But eventually they'd reclaim number one just because brand recognition. Wizards of the Coast Dungeons and Dragons is McDonald's. And while there are other hamburger chains that have temporarily knocked McDonald's off of the top, eventually, inevitably, McDonald's resumes its top spot simply because it's McDonald's. Brand recognition. Same with D&D. There is a game that could knock it off the top spot for a while, but eventually Wizards of the Coast D&D would reclaim it. Will it be as popular as it is now? No. I mean, there are so many factors involved for it to hit the height of popularity that it has hit over the last 3-4 years. The amount of factors that would have to happen again for it to repeat the level of success it's had. I mean, just money-wise, it's not made as much money as it has a year ago. So that's just showing that there was just so many factors in its favor at the time to have it hit that top $9 billion mark. But I don't see that happening again unless, yeah, I mean, the amount of things that would have to happen. So there you go. If you're curious about games that are doing better in sales, at least this week, number one is a Warhammer Fantasy. Number two is the One Ring from Free League. Free League kicking it out of the park as always. Number 3, Midnight. That's a surprise. But I guess people want Grim Dark 5e. So yeah, there we go. I got nothing else to talk about. So thank you for being part of the OGGM Adventures and having me have 700 plus subscribers. I greatly appreciate it. Happy Pride Month. Talk to you losers later. Call of Cthulhu, number 2 role-playing game in the entire world. Number 1 role-playing game in the entire world. Ha ha! Suck it, Wizards of the Coast. You're only number 1 in the United States.